Okay, so we're looking at IELTS Task 1, and we're looking at a table and change over time with this table, okay? So the table below shows the consumer durables owned in Britain from 1972 to 1983. Write a report for a university lecturer describing the information shown below. You should write at least 150 words. Okay, so it's showing you what percentage of houses in the UK have all of these different things. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is the dates. We're going from 72 to 83, which means everything's in the past. Everything you write should be in the past. It's much better to be consistent with your tense and be correct than try to get fancy with your tenses and be incorrect. Okay, so let's take a quick scan through. So the first thing I'm seeing is I'm looking at video. Okay, video's only introduced right at the end. So I'm thinking that's something interesting to talk about. And the similar thing to dishwashers, okay? So they only appeared right at the end, and the smallest number of houses have them in 1983. Okay, so I would probably think, okay, well, that's a link. I'm going to talk about that. What else can we see? Okay, what increased? 37, 64, increase. 93, 98, increase. 87, 95, increase. 73, 94, increase. 66, 80, increase. 42, 77, increase. Okay, and then just from looking at these numbers, most of them are pretty similar. I think the ones with the biggest increase, telephone had a kind of a big increase, and probably so did television. Not television, I mean central heating. Went from 37 to 64. Okay, so then I'm thinking that's interesting. That's something I'm going to talk about. That's like the biggest change. And then most other stuff stayed pretty consistent. I mean, refrigerator did go up a little bit. Washing machine went up a little bit. But I think those are the two most interesting ones. So, okay, in general, so if we're thinking about an overview, we're thinking about the general trends, which is basically that everything went up. Okay, nothing went down. And there's a general increase in consumer goods, and then also an introduction of new goods during this period, the dishwasher and video, okay? And then my body 1 and body 2 will be giving more detail about these goods. So I think, your introduction, you've got to paraphrase the information, you've got to give your overview, which you just talked about there, you've got to give your detail 1 and your detail 2 paragraphs, okay? That's your structure. So now we've looked at that. Let's see what this candidate has done. The given chart illustrates the consumer durables, households with telephone owned in Britain. Okay. Well, this isn't really a paraphrase. They've just kind of copied what the original sentence says. The consumer durable percentage of households such as telephone. Okay. So such as giving an example, they're basically saying the household is a telephone. So that doesn't make any sense. Okay. The percentage of households that own consumer durables, such as telephones and refrigerators, in Britain from 1972 to 1983. Okay, so this is a grammar issue here. Overall, it is clear that all items in the house, in what house? In general, right? In households, increased for about a decade years. We can't say a decade years. A decade is 10 years. For about a decade. Okay. Or over the decade. Okay, so again, we've got issues of grammar, we've got some issues of vocabulary here. Looking at the table chart closely, just say one, say table or chart, don't say both. Looking at the table closely, central heating had risen 27. Describe each individual percent. Had risen 27 percentage points from 37 to 64, the highest increase among other household items. Okay, so have got a comparison. Okay, that's good. And then a slightly lower figure, the telephone was the second highest increase rates. A slightly lower figure, comma, the telephone was had the second highest increase in rates. From 1972 to 1983, the biggest percentage of households was the TV. Again, we've got this issue of the biggest percentage of households was the TV. The household is not a TV. So this issue from the biggest percentage, the item, let's write this down there. The item owned by the biggest percentage of households was the TV. The video first appeared in 1983, and the vacuum cleaner consistently rose from 87 into 1982, but in 1988 it had disappeared. I would just ignore the fact that the vacuum cleaner is missing here. I think they're just missing data. It's not like every house in Britain gave up their vacuum cleaner. I just think it's just a mistake. So I would just ignore it and not talk about it. The refrigerator had increased approximately 21 for 11 years. 21 what? 21% for 11 years. The washing machine also increased approximately 14, but has decreased very little. Turned up. The dishwasher turned up. That's very informal, and usually we would use that to talk about a person. Like, he finally turned up. So to me, that gives me the image of a washing machine has just like walked into the house. Like, the dishwasher turned up in 1978 for the first time. Okay, so my issue while reading this is it's the problem that a lot of people do with the IELTS Task 1, where it feels like this candidate is just listing random things that they've noticed about the graph. It doesn't feel planned. The worst thing you can do in IELTS Task 1 is just look at the graph, write a sentence. Look at the chart, write another sentence. Look for something else, write another sentence. Because then you end up with something like this that technically is correct, but it feels very jumbled and confused. Like you're just saying random things. Oh, and then the telephone also increased. And the dishwasher went up from this to that. And the telephone turned up in 1972. It doesn't feel planned. The best thing you can do before you start writing is to do a plan just like I did here, where you've picked out the main points already. You know, a lot of people panic because there is only 20 minutes. You're not writing a lot for Task 1. You probably only need 10 to 15 minutes to write 150 words, or you should, okay, if you're going for IELTS 6.0, like to that level. So take 2 to 3 minutes, it doesn't take long, just to look carefully through the data and plan in advance what you're going to write about. Make a little note, make a memo. You can write it in Korean if you want to. Just make a little plan before you start writing, and then it sounds a lot more logical and a lot more structured, because what people tend to do is they just kind of go, okay, I'm just going to write about the television. It increased in 93 and 1974 was 95% and 1976 and 78 was 96%. And they just kind of list everything out. But if you do a plan like we just did here, it's much easier to write, and it makes your answer sound much more coherent, okay? So in terms of task achievement, they did try to have a one-sentence overview. They didn't really paraphrase, though. So, I mean, in terms of task achievement, it wasn't great. Cohesion and coherence was pretty low. It was confusing to read, and I think you could hear that as I was reading it. It just felt like random information in a list, not like a coherent summary of the key or most interesting points, okay? Vocabulary was okay. They were trying to do sort of vocabulary minimally adequate for the task, okay? And the grammar was a little bit confusing, and there were quite a few mistakes, so it was hard for me to understand the meaning. So, I mean, I think probably overall this would come out at a 4.5. I mean, maybe it would be pulled down to a 4. Maybe, you know, to be generous, you could sort of bump this up maybe to a 4.5 if you were feeling generous about it. But I think it would sort of hit a 4.5 kind of level. This candidate has done a good job because it's not an easy table to talk about. And they have got the basic structure there. I would just say to this candidate, the best thing you can do is plan before you write. And that's going to help you a lot. Just a more coherent, planned answer. And already these scores are going up for you for Task 1.